So my talk today, looking forward to it. It's been a strange summer, a busy summer, a pandemic summer. And I looked to get inspiration and I fell upon John Lewis as where I was going for as far as the inspiration is concerned. So on June 7th, this was 10 days before John Lewis died, he went down to Black Lives Matter Plaza across from the White House. There was a photograph by Gary Williams Jr. that was used in the Washington Post that you can see on your screen that captured both Lewis's fragility and his fortitude. This 80-year-old legislator, his body was racked with cancer, standing alone, cane in his hand, looking both frail and strong, at peace with his mortal condition, but exuding a determination that defined his whole life. President Obama, in a eulogy for his fallen hero, called Lewis a man of pure joy and unbreakable perseverance. And for many people, persevering through hardships and carrying crushing burdens like Lewis did, for many people, that would squeeze the joy out of life, but not for Lewis. He walked through darkness, but he carried light. Lewis embodied a number of paradoxes. Interpersonally, he was gentle but powerful. He could open up and give people space. And he could also push very hard for what he believed was right. He was also fiercely independent, but also enmeshed with others in an interrelated web. He defended liberty while building community. Now, these days, stuck in a pandemic, grappling with the dysfunctional politics, committed to ethical culture, and committed to racial justice work, and both afraid of the dangers and in love with life, I'm so filled with paradoxical energies these days. And I assume many of you are too. So today I wanted to explore the paradoxes that Lewis embodied so naturally: communalism and individualism, strength and gentleness, perseverance and joy. And he's a wonderful example of human integrity, that wholeness of being. So I hope my comments both honor Lewis and help us all process our own paradoxes so that we can live more fully. Let me start with Lewis's mix of communalism and individualism. The importance of community was clear early in his life. He was 4 years old in Aunt Seneva's cabin with 14 other children when a storm erupted. And as the winds howled and began to lift one of the corners of the house, Aunt Seneva told the children to hold hands and march together to a corner of the house that was being lifted by the wind. And as that corner pressed back to earth, another corner would lift and the children would head over to that corner. And as Lewis recalled, quote, "And so it went back and forth, 15 children walking with the wind, holding the trembling house down with the weight of our small bodies. Children holding hands, walking with the wind. That to me is America," end quote. Lewis believed that in order to weather our social storms that threaten the nation, we have to work together. To survive danger and division, he promoted what he called a most precious and pure concept, the beloved community. That's a term he learned from Martin Luther King that guided him like a beacon. To get closer to the beloved community, all of us, those with power and those with none, must pull together for the common good. And this came naturally to Lewis because he was drawn to protect the powerless, the innocent, and the vulnerable. It was why, as a child, he wanted to care for the chickens on the family farm. To John, the chickens were outcasts, ignored and left to fight over scraps. But John would care for them and even preach to them. As he grew older, Lewis was troubled by the divisions in the world, and he saw how politics could set people against each other. He wrote, "If we're going to begin turning back toward one another, to humanize one another, we need to humanize the political system. We need to make it respond directly to the problems of the people, not just the people in power. but including, crucially, those who have no power, those who have no voice. Lewis declared, "I believe that the next frontier for America lies in the direction of our spiritual strength as a community." In his autobiography, he explained the importance of being in community. Quote, "Not separated, not polarized, not adversarial. People are dying to embrace these feelings if only they could trust, if only they could dare to believe both in one another and in their leaders." End quote. Lewis was deeply communal in his outlook. But at the same time, Lewis was fiercely independent. He wouldn't compromise his values, even when his friends and his loved ones pleaded. Some of those closest to him called him stubborn. At 23 years old, the youngest speaker at the March for Washington, he was pushed by some of his civil rights icons, some of his heroes, to soften his speech. But he pushed back because he wanted to speak truth to power. While leading the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, known as SNCC, he remained true to the nonviolent principles of Gandhi and King, despite younger activists wanting him to radicalize, to strike back at the system. Lewis stuck to his convictions even when presidents of his own party, Kennedy and Johnson and Carter, asked him to compromise. The New York Times said that Lewis displayed an independent streak, that he didn't always follow the party line. I mean, he opposed the Persian Gulf War, he condemned the North American Free Trade Agreement, he refused to take part in the Million Man March due to what he called divisive and bigoted statements by organizers. His individualism linked him to his long life defense of one person, one vote. His individualism is tied to his belief that each and every person is precious, almost sacred, he said. And so was the right to vote. He said, "Many people died trying to protect that right. I was beaten, jailed, and I stood up for it. But we must ensure that every vote and every voter counts." I mean, that's one reason why ethical culture has gotten involved in Reclaim Our Vote. And so far, ethical culturists have sent 70,000 postcards to voters in key states, urging them to vote. Voters who might have been de-enfranchised by the political system. And the vote was an important part of Lewis's life. Even his great-great-grandfather, Tobias Carter, was registered to vote in Alabama in 1867, nearly a century before the Voting Rights Act. And yet no one in his family voted up until Lewis's lifetime because of disenfranchisement. So on the 50th anniversary of that important Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, Lewis condemned the court decision, voiding many of its anti-discrimination provisions. He said, "I gave a little blood for the bridge in Selma, Alabama for the right to vote. I'm not going to stand by and let the Supreme Court take that vote away from us. You cannot stand by. You cannot sit down. You have to stand up, speak out, and get in the way." Now, one of the reasons why Lewis could embody both individualism and commitment to community was he saw them as linked. Like Felix Adler, who founded ethical culture, Lewis appreciated that individualism and communalism support each other. To SNCC and to Lewis, freedom and independence are best assured through cooperative action. Citizens have to understand, as Lewis explained, the best way to help themselves is to help each other, to work for each other, to push for each other, to pull for each other. Individualism and communalism are one. Let me turn to John Lewis's unique mix of gentleness and strength. Now, he drew his strength from many sources. One source was his ability to see the big picture and feel the spirit of history, as he called it. Lewis understood that things don't change overnight. He committed to the struggle beyond a lifetime, and this stretched far into the future and reached many generations into the past. To younger activists, Lewis counseled, quote, "Take a long, hard look at the road you will have to travel once you have made a commitment to work for change. Know that this transformation will not happen right away. We used to say that ours is not the struggle of one day or 1 week or 1 year. Ours is not the struggle of one judicial appointment or presidential term. Ours is the struggle of a lifetime, or maybe even many lifetimes. And each one of us is in every generation must do our part." So Lewis appreciated the big picture, especially during his trips to Africa, which offered him a fresh perspective on the global nature of racial liberation. He visited Ghana to mark the 400th anniversary of Africans being brought in chains to what's now the USA. And Representative Nancy Pelosi, who accompanied Lewis on that trip, said, "John committed his life to advancing justice and understood that to build a better future, we had to acknowledge the past." History, Lewis reminded us, prepares us for the long haul. Lewis also grew strong because he transformed suffering into strength. He drew great strength from his faith, from the story of Christ's redemptive suffering. But Lewis found similar transformational strength in non-Christian sources like Gandhi, who embodied suffering in order to change hearts and change the world. This method fueled civil rights activism. Jim Foreman taught this to activists at the Highlander Center, and it helped prepare activists for sit-ins and freedom rides. It helped transform hatred, the taunts, the threats, the insults, the beatings. It helped transform those into dedication to justice and love. Lewis often discussed redemptive suffering and how, for him, there was, quote, something in the very essence of anguish that is liberating, cleansing, redemptive. He said, quote, "The purity of unearned suffering is a wholly ineffective thing. It affects not only ourselves, but it touches and changes those around us as well. It opens us and those around us to a force beyond ourselves, a force that is right and moral, the force of righteous truth. That is the basis of human experience." End quote. By tapping into his faith, by seeing the big picture, Lewis was able to demonstrate a power that most of his powerful colleagues admired and even envied. But at the same time, Lewis was one of the most gentle public figures. Often when people become powerful, they become less gentle, less open, less willing to listen. They can become inflated with pride and arrogance. As President Obama explained, most of us, quote, "start feeling as if we can't afford to extend kindness or decency to other people, that we're better off if we are above other people or looking down on them." And so often that's encouraged in our culture. But Obama continued and said, the thing about John was just how gentle and humble he was. And despite this storied, remarkable career, he treated everyone with kindness and respect because it was innate to him. So as Lewis's accrued more power and fame, he seemed even more accessible, more gentle towards the least powerful folks. I mean, just ask his security guards. They said that walking through an airport took forever because Lewis would stop to speak to everyone. He shook every hand. He posed for every selfie. He listened to personal stories. And this gentle and trusting nature, some people called naive. In fact, many people didn't think Lewis could make it in the rough and tumble world of politics because he was too trusting. But he explained, there is no other way I can be. I always begin with an attitude of trust. I assume that your word is good until you show me otherwise. I refuse to be suspicious until I have reason to be. Yes, this sets me up to be burned now and then, but the alternative is to be constantly skeptical and distanced. I'd rather be occasionally burned, but able to connect, than always safe, but always distant. Lewis nurtured his vulnerability through principles of nonviolence. Nonviolence, not just as a tactic, because it became part of his personality. It was a way of life, a way of being for him. And this helped him endure threats and violence. Lewis explained what many civil rights activists learned, that social revolution requires a revolution of the spirit. And Lewis's life was a revolution of spirit. And it helped him remain gentle, but strong at the same time. Let me turn to perseverance and joy. Now, almost everyone knows of the perseverance of John Lewis. After he died, the New York Times headlined, called John Lewis a man of unbreakable perseverance. His determination started young again, even when about going to school. His parents would pressure him to help bring in the harvest at the farm, but he would hide under his porch and run after the school bus at the last minute. And he recalled, I was going to school no matter what. And this perseverance helped him through challenges in college, through harassment at lunch counters, beatings at bus depots, tear gas at the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And his persistence helped him when he was stripped naked at Parchment Farm, a notorious prison where he worked hard labor for 3 weeks. And it helped him in 44 other arrests. This perseverance helped him during his first term in the US House of Representatives, when he was one of 12 House members out of 435 who never missed a vote. It helped him reach across the aisle to serve his disempowered constituents. But he reached across the aisle not because he was less insistent on doing what he thought was right. He was patient in spirit, but he was not willing to postpone justice. In fact, the original draft of his speech at the March in Washington explained that patience means very little to people who are hungry now, hurting now, oppressed now. And he explained to those who urged patience how sometimes patience, these are his words, sometimes patience is a dirty and nasty word. Lewis admired perseverance of others, especially poor, disempowered people who survive in this unjust world. When he visited miners in West Virginia, he was struck by how, despite their poverty and desperation, they still had hope and pride. He wrote, "Their tenacity and their indomitable spirit both shamed me and inspired me." Now, for such a powerful person to be shamed and inspired by folks in desperate straits reflects Lewis's humility. And he understood that the road to justice is a long road. Many activists today, young activists, frustrated at how slow the arc of history is turning towards justice, admired Lewis's persistence. Patrice Cullors, one of the founders of Black Lives Matter, asked recently what she would say to Lewis if she had met him. She said, "I would praise him for setting such a remarkable standard for what it means to show up for Black life during his lifetime, and his ability to stay the course." And she added that she would ask him to mentor her and other young activists to help them stay the course as well. To be as persistent as Lewis, to endure abuse and setbacks and resistance, but to remain loving and joyful is remarkable. In one of his first congressional hearings, this was before he was elected to the House, he testified to a Senate committee that public policy must be guided by love. Public policy must be guided by love. So rare was that sentiment expressed on Capitol Hill that Senator Cranston remarked, "Mr. Lewis, it's been a long time since we heard the word love in this hallowed place. We're glad that there's someone in this administration who believes in love." Love and joy remained a part of Lewis's life despite growing cynicism. As I mentioned before, Lewis remained open and compassionate towards everyone. He enjoyed speaking with everyday folks who crowded around him. Every person was precious to Lewis. He believed that people had the capacity for kindness and were of inherent worth. It's why he opposed the death penalty. He wrote, I happen to believe that in the bosom of every human being, there's a spark of the divine. When we kill another human being, we're killing a reflection of the divine." President Obama was right in saying, "John always saw the best in us, and he never gave up. He never stopped speaking out because he saw the best in us. He believed in us, even when we didn't believe in ourselves." Hillary Clinton, speaking under the Capitol dome as Lewis lay in state, commented on how we will all miss his positive attitude, especially now in this time of political antipathy and meanness. She said, "It was such a joy of my life to be his friend." Hillary Clinton spoke of, quote, his incredible life of service and activism, and yes, putting his life on the line. But he was a joyful man, she said. He was someone who had a good time. If you saw him dance, he had a big smile on his face. He had a joy that was just contagious. We need that kind of contagion now more than ever, that joy. So he's gone, and we have to remember him and the lessons that he taught. John Lewis naturally and humbly embodied these paradoxes, energies of community and individualism, strength and gentleness, perseverance and joy. And we have to too. Lewis did so with integrity, something that I mentioned at the beginning of my talk. The first dictionary definition of integrity is the quality of being honest and having strong moral principles. Now, John Lewis epitomized this as few others did. But a second definition also reflects the spirit of Lewis and helps me make sense of his incredible ability to hold paradoxes together. He said, the second definition defines integrity as the state of being whole and undivided. Lewis lived this type of integrity, an inner wholeness, a deep unity of spirit. When he was struck down on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, his wholeness helped him be calm and accepting in the midst of chaos and danger. He wrote about that moment, "I remember how strangely calm I felt as I thought, this is it. People are going to die. I'm going to die here." His willingness to die for his beliefs helped him overcome his fear of death. One of the more ultimate paradoxes. His wholeness allowed him to look directly at our racist history while remaining optimistic. He could face the evil that twists human beings to do horrible things while remaining committed to goodness. He explained, "I have always believed that there is room for both outrage and anger and optimism and love." Outrage and anger and optimism and love. We need both today. Both sides of that. And the integrity and the wholeness, this synthesis of opposites, is something I try to nurture in ethical culture. John Lewis taught us not to be ground down by the suffering and ugliness of the world. We can't retreat from them into the realms of intellectual utopias. We have to engage with the world as it is, while remaining guided by our ideals. And that's something that John Lewis and our founder Felix Adler had in common. We cannot wait for the perfect clarity of consensus while we pursue our ideals, because civilization is too precarious for that. We must act. It's both predictable and ironic how our current president so mischaracterized John Lewis in a tweet of a couple of years ago. It read, "Congressman John Lewis should spend more time on fixing and helping the district, which is in horrible shape and falling apart, not to mention crime infested, rather than falsely complaining about election results. All talk, 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 no action or results. Sad." Now, Lewis didn't overreact. His understated reply was simply this: "Today, Donald Trump attacked me on Twitter. He said that I'm all talk and no action. I've been beaten bloody, tear gassed, fighting for what's right in America. I've marched at Selma with Dr. King. Sometimes that's what it takes to move our country forward in the right direction." He responded to ugliness, but shone back light. And few people have so embraced the ability to have both creed and deed central in their life. Lewis could talk the talk and walk the walk, and he worked ceaselessly for good causes, leaving him little time for personal pleasure. Near the end of his autobiography, Lewis cited an old African proverb: "When you pray, move your feet." In other words, creed and deed should be one. Lewis explained, as a nation, if we care for the beloved community, we must move our feet and our hands, our hearts, our resources to build and not to tear down, to reconcile and not to divide, to love and not to hate, to heal and not to kill. In the final analysis, we are one people, one family, one house, the American house, the American family. Let me conclude by just reading a bit from Lewis's last public statement. It was an open letter many of you have read, entitled, "Together You Can Redeem the Soul of Our Nation." It began, "While my time here has now come to an end, I want you to know in the last days and hours of my life, you inspired me. You filled me with hope about the next chapter of the great American story when you used your power to make a difference to our society." To the end, John Lewis was ministering to us, not worried about himself. He offered optimism and idealism so we could bring out our best. And even in dark times, his light helped transcend his fears and limitations. He embodied contradictions in order to transform them. He gave himself fully and wholly to do the good work that needs to be done. He concluded that final open letter this way: "Though I may not be here with you, I urge you to answer the highest calling of your heart and stand up for what you truly believe. In my life, I have done all I can to demonstrate that the way of peace, the way of love and nonviolence is the more excellent way. Now it is your turn to let freedom ring. When historians pick up their pens to write the story of the 21st century, let them say that it was your generation who laid down the heavy burdens of hate at last, and that peace finally triumphed over violence, aggression, and war. So I say to you, walk with the wind, brothers and sisters, and let the spirit of peace and the power of everlasting love be your guide. Thank you all for being here, and thanks most to John Lewis.